South Madrid from Carlos III. She's assistant professor there. She has a broad interest under the big hat of labor economics. And today she's going to present new work on the interaction between grandparents and the effect of growing up with grandparents in a skip generation, which I guess is perhaps to some, at least to me, partly mysterious word, what this generation has skipped. And I leave the floor over to you. Interactions are for you to take and to postpone at your discretion. Thanks everyone. Thanks everyone for joining, and particularly for Juan again for her availability. The floor is over to you.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Marcelo and Camila, for inviting me. Yes, I am across the road, but the very last time I was on Complutense campus was for a non-economic related activity, was for a music festival, which I think to our memory right now with COVID is like something that we can't really foresee it's happening again. But yeah, so I'm very happy to be presenting this new work, which I started with a colleague of mine, Tanyamat Srungmunmi at Konkan University back in Thailand. And this is basically the first time we present this new result. I'm going to try to convince you as much as possible, but also would like to take your suggestions of the problem that we come across and where we should go forward from here. Okay, so the title of the presentation, as Marcelo has already mentioned, is this Raised by Grandparents, the Effects of Growing Up in a Skipped Generation Household on Education Attainment. So as you know, I don't think this word is a very familiar term to many of us, especially those who don't work in family economics. So the idea of skipped generations, I think I'll tell you the definition first. This is basically, think of a traditional family where you have parents and children. So this is a two-generation household, as a technical term would go. And then you have three-generation household where you have pretty much like a bigger family that you have grandparents, parents, and children growing up together. So a big family. Skip generation is the opposite. Skip generation is where one main generation, which is the parent generation, is no longer there. So it's skipped, meaning that you have the third generation, which is the youngest generation of young kids growing up with predominantly taken care of by grandparents. So this is a basic definition of skip generation. And I also myself didn't come across this phenomenon, in the past, before this 5 years ago. And basically it's come from the fact that like once you go into a number of few survey in the rural of Thailand, also I think many countries, then when you go into the household, in order to understand how the children's growing up, then the main carers that we mainly come across are grandparents. And then I dig a little bit deeper, and I realized that this phenomenon is obviously not new, and it's a growing phenomenon, and in itself has a lot of the inequality gradient. So when we talked about this concept of skipped generation, the fact that young children's growing up with grandparents, some of the terms that you might come across are the words of children's left behind. So this is a sort of a new territory of economists working into household economic issues, but it's not a small problem. So I cannot really quote you the global rate of this phenomenon of this left behind children or skipped generations, but certain facts here and there, especially from China, tells you that say 66% of children growing up in rural China are those who are left behind by their parents who migrated to different provinces to find work. Overall in Southeast Asia, where Thailand is overall about 10%. Philippines has slightly higher incidence of these skipped generation family because the family is one of the biggest exporter of workforce to elsewhere in the world. And as I said, many of these phenomena of the skipped generations are caused by migration factors. But also in other countries, say in African countries, you also have a pretty high incidence of skipped generations. But it's mainly because of the country that had gone through war, through a lot of violence and conflict throughout the time. So the predominant adult generations are gone, and especially also the case of HIV. And we start to see this phenomenon of skipped generations among family in developed, what we call developed countries. And some of these factors come from crime, the incarcerations of adult breadwinners due to drugs and violent problems. And as I mentioned earlier, this is obviously you can think of this phenomenon as a decision of the household by choice, but it has a pretty high inequality gradient to it. So what I show you now as a motivation to move on from here is the one-time survey in Thailand of young children and youth national survey back in 2010, and then you see that the problem of the skipped generation or the incidence of the skipped generations are less likely to come across for people from Bangkok area, those from a bit more privileged area. And then you see, over 20% of family in the Northeast and in the North where the economic situation is slightly more deprived. And you find many of these family structures. So sorry, before I go on, I don't see your face. So therefore, if you do have questions, then please just shout and I will try to respond to your question as cleverly as possible. Okay, so the motivation of this work is, it's a grand motivation. We would like to see, the fact that these are, not so new phenomenon, but it's very little under research. We would like to see, if there is a classic decision of trade-off between, family needing to find work elsewhere, to have income supplements. Would that be any long-term consequences, whether it's bad or good, to the children growing up, with their grandparents back in the original residence? So we would like to see if this also the issues that is had a long-term effect, or it's just something that eventually you can compensate later on in the life. But the motivation from also this topic is that we know that even if it's just a classic trade-off of economic gains, most of the time the consequences are left unknown, because there's a lot of uncertainties and a lot of the lack of knowledge of what could happen to children back in the area, mainly the rural area, because parents go on and try to find income supplement and send back, what we usually know as, the money sent back, but then they don't know what else, that they have to face, whether this is just a one shot of loss of family time, or is it because this problem is going to get exacerbated later on due to many of the theories in child development that come out and say that with the lack of investment early in the ages of children, the problem is going to get to become more serious, and it's even harder to compensate what's lost when the children was young. Another issue that this issues of being raised by grandparents versus own parents, the concern that there might be a generation gap of what we call parenting technology. So we're not saying that grandparents do not love or care for the grandchildren as equally as the parents, which I don't think it's not fair to say. I think they do, but they might have a different knowledge, or what economists call a different technology of how you can raise a child effectively, and it's unavoidable that over time, new technology, new parent techniques have been developed. Things that you should do to your kids. From classic example of whether or not you should hit the kids, or you should, how you should talk to the kids when the kids have done something wrong. This has also been a pretty big generational change over time. So we would like to investigate that, with this in mind, that would that lead to a long-term consequences, especially the consequences of inequality? Because as I said, many of the phenomenon of skipped generations are experienced by those who are already from the underprivileged background. So therefore, if many of these families are facing even more deprived situations, would that have even long-term consequences on intergenerational mobility? Okay, and therefore at the end it's going to raise some policy responses in terms of what kind of labor market policy should you encourage, what kind of childcare policies or even training policy to carers, and how would that also intertwine with when we think about old age pensions and educational policy. Okay, so the questions that I'm answering in this project specifically is we will try to estimate causally the long-run effects of not having parents with you for a long duration of time across multiple stages of childhood. And we're going to try to estimate this effect based on one of the key variables that we have in the data set, which is education attainment. Okay, so we're going to be looking at, so I'm going to be dividing childhood quite strictly from the age when the child is born up to the end of primary school year. So this is my definition of childhood. And I'm going to be focusing on, the effect overall and how the effect of being exposed or, growing up with grandparents at different stages of your life. Whether that would give you a similar effect, or maybe certain stages it doesn't really affect that much at all, or certain ages the effect could be more strong. And in order to do this analysis, especially to be able to track a bit more of the longitudinal effect of growing up with grandparents, when you were young, I exploit this longitudinal structures of this data set, which we call as 1,000 type data. I'm going to explain a little bit more next what this data is and how important it is for this analysis, and looking at the effect on the education years of schooling at the end. The main causal identifications that I'm pursuing in this project right now would be using a lot of the fixed effect analysis, especially the fixed effects of sibling fixed effects. So comparing between siblings who experience parenting absence at different periods in their life. So that is with the intention to try to take care of a number of the endogeneities when it comes to family decisions. Because we know that many times, actually most of the time, when you decide of whether or not you stay or you leave, or even how many kids you would have, this is a very endogenous decision. So I'm going to try to mitigate this problem using the fixed effects.
Well, I have a question. I don't want to interrupt you, but you're going to focus on families in which the skip generation is caused by immigration, by chance of going to work to somewhere else, or are you focusing also in problems with incarceration or?
Yeah, good question. With the data sets, most of the family will be as a result of migration. And yeah, I don't think very few family that I have on the data set is as due to incarceration. But so, it is. Yeah.
There's not going to be a problem whether the effect is caused because the absence is caused by incarceration, death. Okay, so you focus on the situation where there is a decision of migrate to other cities, so there is apparently a positive aspect of the skip generation. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no, I would love to also evaluate, whether this also comes from incarceration, but with the lack of data, I won't be able to say. So yeah.
Okay, that's not such a the problem in Thailand. In Thailand, it should be a problem in the US, I guess, or somewhere else. Okay, thanks a lot.
Thank you. Yeah, so that's the. So I was just talking about the main dedication. And more questions?
Yeah, it's Jaime here.
Hi, Jaime.
Just a question about how we should interpret the contrafactual scenario. So should we think about, because you talk very well about the trade-off, so think about the migration shock. So is the contrafactual the scenario in which the parents don't leave, but they do not get the extra income, or parents don't leave keeping income constant? Because that's the problem of the parents leave because they want to get more income. So the children is going to be benefit. He gets the benefit for that extra income. So how should I think about the contrafactual here? Like keeping low income but with the parents, or trying to keep high income but with the parents?
Yeah, so I think two of the counterfactual try to, I mean, both of the scenario that you say. So we're going to be comparing the same, like similar family, but among those that have, you know, like family, like parents intact in the family and control for household finance. So for that, and then I think that will be the counterfactual that if I were to keep income constant, then what could happen? Then I think with the the approach towards instrumental variable, that will be taking into account the endogeneity of what could happen if they have more income, I think. But yeah, I mean, but that's the key why the endogeneity is serious, right? Because the counterfactual is they might not even have, you know, if they have stay back, then the liquidity constraint might be a problem. But so I'm not sure whether this also answered your question, but like one of the mechanisms that we can directly investigate is looking at how much money they get sent back and how these families spend the money.
Okay.
Does that answer the question?
Yeah, no, it does. Yeah, thanks.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so the main identifications that I'm more confident to show you is using all the fixed effects from both birth core fixed effect, the locality fixed effect, and sibling fixed effect, giving different assumption on the endogeneity that we can tackle. I'm going to be presenting to you at the very end of our attempt to use instrumental variable, especially the shift share approach. But that's where our analysis has a bit of a problem. Okay, so I'll show it to you at the end. And yeah, so then in the analysis, I'm going to be especially focusing on comparing this exposure to different family structure across different childhood period. We're going to try to see, at what age where the effect is more sensitive and what age where the effect might be absent. And I think so similar to what I just replied to Jaime, because the counterfactual is that, for this family, if they have not left, then the liquidity constraint would be an issue anyway. So in terms of the what we can offer as a potential mechanism in terms of explaining, whether money sent back can compensate, the parental time that might have lost, and I'm showing you some evidence of, money sent back and how the family spent these remittances. And I'm going to be also at the end using a complementary data set from UNICEF, which is the we call it MIC, so it's multiple indicator cohort studies of 2015. To show you other aspects of child development measures and whether the investment behavior between different families also matter to why we find the adverse effects on some children. Okay.
Two quick concerns.
Yeah.
If I'm very quick. Number one, is there anything in the broad literature of social sciences, education, psychology, on to what extent belonging to a skilled generation can be detrimental for achievement? case studies, event studies, anecdotal evidence by sociologists. This is literature you may contribute to.
Yeah, exactly. So I think this is also on the page of the literature review that I'm about to say. So as I think as you already foresee, so the issues of skip generation has been thought more about by sociologists for some time, especially demographists for a number of period of time. But again, as you say, is an anecdote evidence because most of the studies are through interviews. And obviously, they do find adverse evidence on psychological health of the child, and as well as all the deprived cognitive and non-cognitive development. But many of these studies, as I say, they are survey evidence. So therefore, the causal analysis is not the strongest aspect of the analysis. But economists do also have evidence on the effect of parental absence, especially the evidence coming from, actually most of the evidence that we have, especially a lot of good evidence come from China, where they have the one of the biggest data sets of internal migration. But even that, the evidence are mixed. So I think a lot of the time, I think most of the studies agree that remittances sent back, has increased, and it should have the follow-up effect on the investment on the child, and therefore improve cognitive and non-cognitive skills. But you also have other side of evidence that completely the contrary, that say, you find the adverse effect on education, on health and stuff. And there's also still lack of evidence on the timing and also the patterns of parental absence. So many of the studies, without even studies, especially on skip generation, is already focusing on, we used to the issues on single parenting, absent of fathers away from the family. So we know that the patterns of parental absence matters. And now we're looking at the case where it's the patterns of where none of the parents were there at all, and none of them were there for a pretty long period of time. And that's also raised the questions of, if we already know from the literature of child development that time investment matters, how much you speak to your child matters, who speak to your child matters, and what to do with your child matters. And also the fact that information updating matters a lot to child development, then this is, where we should go on from here and see if this is children going out with grandparents who we know on average had less energy than parents. On average, there's a little bigger generational gap than in terms of information reception than the parents. And also it's also a different family dynamic now, that there's a different bargaining situations going on between parents raising the child and the parents themselves raising the child. Okay.
My second point was about, I had a very quick point about the skip generation definition, which you just mentioned in the literature. So if I'm a child from a skip background, I may have no parents at home, one of the two, or both.
No parents at home. So by our definition, no parents at home. What
about? So again, back to Jaime's point about the counterfactual. Here, the counterfactual is both parents, which I guess gives you a higher power test than comparing no parents with only one of the two. I guess here, just a note perhaps in the paper would be about the relative frequency of skip generation children with no parents, with one of the two, or with both. Because you may.
So the paper will be comparing the skip generation, or as in no parent at all, versus, so the main analysis will be them versus the other type of family. And the other type of family are composed of a family with parents present. So 2-generation family, so parent and children, and 3-generation family, parent, grandparent, and children. So it's parents versus no parents.
Yeah, my point is mainly perhaps that this is the highest power, the greatest, the effect, the counterfactual, no parent versus two parents is the one which gives you highest power. Perhaps if you focused on no parent versus one parent, because I don't know about the migration literature, but there may be evidence of gender difference in propensity to migrate. And perhaps just a note there may suggest we would tend not to reject the null of no difference.
Okay.
With a single parent.
Cool.
Just in case a referee said, okay, you show me no parents versus two parents, why are you hiding something relevant about a single parent?
Okay.
That's
that's great.
I want to slow you down on this.
That will be the next step that we would like to do, but we also have what you see already a relatively small sample. But yeah, I think that will be a pretty good step to go on from here. Yeah. Okay. So now let me talk a little bit about the data set. So this is a Towson type data set. So originally it's organized by the MIT economist Robert Towson, who was working in Thailand at the time, and to try to evaluate impacts of the 1997 Asian financial crisis. So basically, this whole structure was organized to follow household finances in the rural and the urban area, and then at the end, they ended up following this household for 20 years. So for this, it gives us a pretty rich and rich in terms of information, and one of the longest longitudinal household data set in developing countries. So here there's a map of Thailand on the left-hand side. So the survey follow selected provinces, starting from 4 and then go up to 6 provinces for, as I said, for about on average 20 period of, almost 20 years. But it started off focusing on household in the rural area, and then the survey expanded to household in the urban area. So the urban area started only in 2005. So this is going to matter a little bit to our sample selections and how many of the kids I can follow. So again, so this is a survey that follow household as a unit, but within the household, they also survey all the family members. So basically, I'm going to be following children who was already there in 1998 when the survey started, and also children that later on was born into the family. So that means in the design of the sample selection, as I said before, so I'm going to be looking at the impact of these family structures across the defined stage of childhood. Okay, and I'm going to divide the stage of childhood from 0 to 12. So I'm going to be dividing them in more detail into 3 different periods: a very early life, 0 to 2, the early childhood from 3 to 5. So I ended at 5 because this is the sensitive period of child development. And then there will be a later period of the age where the children start going to the compulsory schooling in primary school up until the age of 12. So this is our own defined childhood period. And the education outcome would be the final education attainment at the end of the survey year, which is 2015. And I'm going to be using years of schooling. So in the next slide, I'm going to be showing the slide where I'll be talking about the main sample. So this is the kids that I was able to observe their family structure throughout all the 3 stages of the childhood that I defined, 0 to 2, 3 to 5, and 6 to 12. And then I'm going to be complementing it with a bigger sample, but they are incomplete because for certain kids, I only observe certain stages of this childhood. Okay, the kids in green, I have on the very end of the column, these are the birth cohort. So as I say, because it's just survey year started in 2000, so it's in 1998. So some of the children was already, were born and have reached already a certain age. So I'm restricting the main sample for for those that can observe all the 3 childhood period. So up until of the family structure up to the age of 12, which gives me for the main sample 691 children from the rural area, and the 233 children from the urban area. So this will be the main sample of children that I can follow up until 2015, and that's where I also capture the education attainment at the end date of the survey. And then we also do a complementary analysis with the incomplete sample of more than double the size of this sample. But the incomplete sample, again, we do not capture their family structures or through the 3 stages that I defined, but it gives me more room in terms of the observation. Okay, so quickly to tell you, so how much of the skip generation incidents that we come across for our birth cohorts between the rural sample, the one on the A panel, and the urban sample from the B panel. So overall, kids in the rural sample, they're more likely to experience, growing up only with grandparents as the main carer. So it's up to about, from the 0 to 12, so throughout the childhood period, nearly, I think 30% of the children in our sample have experienced it at least one time. Whereas in the urban sample, more or less between 10 to 20% experience growing up only with grandparents at a point in time. But as one of you guys mentioned, there are also different family structures that we can define. But right now we're going to be comparing this skip generation family, absent of parents at all, to the family with parents present. And there are 2 types of family structure with family presence. The one, it's just the 2 generations, or mom, dad, and child. And the 3 generation is, grandparents, parents, and the children. And so if this table looks a little bit, there's a lot of numbers on this table, but I think what it's trying to explain here is that, so skip generation family, obviously the head of the household tend to be older. And they also have family member living outside in a higher number than other family type. They're less likely to have their own businesses in the area, but instead they're more likely to have a pretty, a good amount of remittances sent back from the family living elsewhere. Okay. And overall, they tend to be slightly less privileged than the other family structures. Okay, so I'm getting now to how we're going to try to analyze this effect. So, so the main variables that I think we come across here are, first of all, I remind you again that I'm going to be looking at these family types across 3 childhood stages, between age of 0 to 2, which is a very early life, 3 to 5, which is still within the early childhood period, and then in the later periods of 6 years old onwards up to age 12. So this is primary school age. We picked primary school age because up until then our sample were within the compulsory schooling law that say you get the education up until primary school. Okay, so we end the childhood to coincide with the compulsory schooling years. So the definition of skip generations, we also obviously take it from the how many how we observe family structures in each of the household. So so strictly speaking, if they grow up with just grandparents, this is skip generations, but grandparents and the grandparents are generally the head of the household. But sometimes we also have family where it started off with the head of household being, the middle generations. But at some point, this middle generations, both himself, herself, and the spouse are jointly absent. And so this also constitute as the skip generation household at some point in our data. And in the paper, we actually define this skip generation in two ways, in the extensive margin and the intensive margin. So the extensive margin is that, whether your parents were completely absent at all during this period of your life, and the intensive margins are, how much of the fractions that your parents absent throughout these 3 ages that we defined. And the main outcome would be the final education attainment that we observe in the final survey date, which is in 2015, and we're converting this educational level attainment to years of schooling. And then in the analysis, we're going to be controlled for characteristic of the child, characteristic of the carers, especially education attainment, and then controlling also for household finances throughout different childhood stages, and whether or not they have family business, or they're from the rural area, or they're all farming area. So try to control for as much of the endogeneity as possible. And then in the end, with the identification strategy based on fixed effects, we're going to try to control for endogeneity in different stages. Okay, so first of all, we're going to be control for the fixed effect. Is that a question?
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah.
So do you observe, because you control for age of the carer, but do you observe the age of the father, of the parents, even if they're absent, or you don't observe that? Because I'm thinking about like very young kids that like, it's not necessarily teenage pregnancy, but like young adults who have a kid, but then they cannot support it, or they just, I don't know, they remain working somewhere else while the parents take care. Yeah,
we control for the age of carer, but not directly the age of parents. But I also instead control for age of family member who lives elsewhere, which by assumption should be a combination of mom and dad. Yeah, no, but it's a good point, because in this situation, actually, you have the case of very young parents and also very young grandparents at the same time.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So we're starting out by assuming that family arrangement is exogenous and just control for birth cohort fixed effects in the specifications. So the specifications, you should think about it as this is a wide panel. So I observe a family structure of these children, of these individuals, throughout their childhood, and then at the end I checked for their education attainment in 2015. Okay, so then I'm going to be plugging in family structure that they experience at different childhood ages, and see if there is an effect at all, or is there any differential effect across different stages of the childhood. Okay, so first of all, we control for the birth cohort fixed effects. And then obviously that would be pretty strong assumptions. So therefore, so now we're going to be in the second equation, then we control for the locality fixed effects. This is based on the assumption that we relax the understanding that family arrangement is now endogenous, but it's driven by the shared preferences across the same community. Okay, so this is, if in the village, if you come from the same village, then you share the same mentalities of staying back or going away, at some point in your life, even if you have a child. And then in the third specifications, we exploit the fact that for many of the family, we do observe multiple children in the family. So then we used the sibling comparison. So within family sibling fixed effect, with the hope that we can take care of the other family endogenous decisions, but with the assumption that this endogenous decision is fixed over time and is common within family. So in other words, we're assuming that the decision to move away do not change over time, and it's constant within each family. So in the next slide, I'm going to be presenting some results from the second specification with cohorts and low quality fixed effect. And then with a bit smaller sample, I'm presenting side by side with the sibling fixed effects. Okay. So before I go on, then so to be able to separate it and try to investigate this potential differential effects of family structures across the 3 stages of childhood, then I also divide this exposure to SCIF family structure in 3 stages of childhood, 0 to 2, 3 to 5, and 6 years old onwards up to the age of 12. Okay, so I show you now the overall effect first. So thinking of the main treatment would be whether or not a child or during the childhood an individual was exposed to SCIF family at all. Okay, during the period of childhood. So I control for a number of things, but here so I select the result from no control for financial, household finance, and then control for everything else. And then with the sibling fixed effect, then we control for everything else at the end. Did I hear a question? No, I guess. Okay, so I'm not sure whether you see my mouse here. So in the very first result, whether or not you've been exposed to living with just your grandparents at all, reduce your final year of schooling in comparison to people within your birth cohort by about 0.3 years of schooling. So the result between column 1 and column 2 are to some extent robust, even if once we control for household finance. But in the analysis where we're a bit more strict in terms of the endogeneity assumptions, where we use smaller sample, just those with siblings, and we do the sibling fixed effect comparison, then the effect got bigger when we do not control for anything else, to about 1.4 year of school years reductions. But having control for all the other control variables, especially household finance variable, the effect tend to disappear. So basically overall here, having been exposed at some point in your life where you do not distinguish, at what point in your childhood you were exposed to SCIF family, the effect is doesn't look like it's there, especially in the 4th column of the specification. But when we moved on to dividing this experience into different stages of childhood, between 0 to 5, and then 6 onwards, or even more defined to 3 different periods, 0 to 2, 3 to 5, and then 6, then you start to see that there are the fact that we do not observe the overall effect most likely come from the fact that certain, living in a SCIF family in certain ages, especially when you're older, you tend to do not experience much of the adverse effect on education, but the adverse effects are a bit more present. Also, especially with the sibling fixed effect in the final column, that you tend to see more of the negative effect at the early life, and especially at the 3 to 5 years old. And so that sort of coincides pretty much with the theory of child development, that so these are the ages where they're not yet in compulsory schooling, but this is the pretty sensitive ages where intensive investments by carers and the right way of investment matter so much to your final human capital attainment. So I'm going to skip the gender differences for the sake of time. But what we observe is that we see the differential of the negative effect more towards the boys than the girls. And again, the effect was shown during the early period of life. So that was the result from the main sample, the sample that I observed for each individual or the 3 period of their childhood. Then to maximize our sample slightly more, then we repeat the same analysis again, but with the incomplete sample. So some of the kids, so the results that I show here, they're not necessarily from the same individual. So it could be some individual where I pick them up when they're slightly older, and some of them when they are slightly younger because of the sample survey collection. But I think the overall story is that when you are exposed to this family structures, or growing up with just mainly your grandparents, with your parents are absent for a longer period of time, later on in your life, like after you already gone to primary school, the effects are smaller and sometimes that we do not detect it. In reverse, especially with the result of the sibling fixed effect, growing up with your grandparents at the very young age tend to be more negatively affected to our outcome, which is the education years of schooling. Okay, so is there any questions right now before I move on to the mechanism results?
No, I think I can move.
I may have let's say a comment rather than a question. Okay, the thing is that you try obviously to establish causal effects, and you make this very nice to have all these fixed effects. The main problem you have is the size of your sample, right? Because when you introduce many. So I wonder, maybe, I don't know if you know some very recent paper by Carlos Cinelli and Chad Haslett that try to, let's say, reason in terms of omitted variables bias to try to bound the possible amount of bias in your estimations. If you want, I can copy paste in the chat the reference to the paper.
No, that'd be great. I don't know the paper, no.
So I copy paste the reference of the paper in the chat so that because you can access the chat, right, of the session, of this session.
Yeah. I'll make sure. Yeah.
Okay, so I will pass it. If not, I can send it by email. The idea is that it provides you a framework to reason about the possible bias and the amount of the bias, which is, when you work with observational data like you do, is probably something that you may want to convince the referees.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much, Andres.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. So, other questions? No. Okay, so now I quickly present you some of the pathway that we think why it drives the negative result we find, especially at the age before 5 or in our sample. So from the Towson data itself, we also observe a pretty rich data on household finance, and one of them is remittances, especially at every year. So what we see is, if we take remittances as now our outcome variable, as the main of the pathway result, then we do observe that so for children growing up in skipped family, they're more likely, and they do have experience higher amount of remittances in the family. So parents that do that migrates away do send the money back, and if you trust the result, especially in column 6, then you see that the money gets sent back gets higher at the older age of the children. So this is, again, you could think of it as, you can still perceive it as a more correlational analysis, but if you take it a bit more seriously, that means it suggests that parents that migrate away have the assumption that the older the kids, the more likely that they would need the money, like the higher the money is required. Whereas, as I explained to you, at the age of 6, they are already in compulsory schooling where most of the time education is free. And in reverse, at the younger age, before 5, this is what the people that work in childhood development think of it as one of the most critical period of investment. This is where investment really should be high. So the results suggest that they do get a lot more money back in comparison to family that do not move out. But it's not to suggest that they are richer than the family that parents stay intact. Okay, so I'm just saying that they get additional supplemental income higher than the others. So does that reflect also in terms of the education spending, like out-of-pocket spending on the child? So my result tends to suggest, using both the local fixed effect and the sibling fixed effects, somehow suggesting the reverse, that even if they get more money sent back, the money spending tend to go elsewhere instead of the out-of-pocket education spending. Especially in the younger age, the spending is actually lower in comparison to family whose parents stay behind. One of the suggestions is, we may also would like to look at how this family structure may have affects human capital development in different angles aside, the very final product, which is year of schooling. Unfortunately, Towson data are not very good at this type of information on childhood development in terms of children's skill, because it was not meant to collect in that way. So I complemented this the analysis by looking from the other evidence from another data set, which is mainly for looking at like child development, which is the multiple indicator cluster surveys of UNICEF. So taking from the national survey in 2015. So you take this as a suggested evidence, because this is nothing. It's not a cost analysis, because I cannot really implement this sibling fixed effect and stuff like that into these tables. But in overall, it tends to suggest that in terms of like strictly cognitive and non-cognitive development between children growing up and living in skipped family and students who are not, we do not observe differences. We do observe differences a little bit in terms of the health outcomes. So they're more likely to experience illness, and they're more likely to be made more overweight.
Sorry, yes, in the cognitive score in the orange column, should be significant, right? If the standard errors are okay, because it's 0.16 divided by 0.07, the standard error.
It should be. I don't know why it's not, but yeah, it should be. Yeah, it should be.
Yeah, I mean, because cognitive score is probably an important coverage you want to argue about, right?
Yes, yeah, it should be, but yeah, I'm not. I'll check again. This is an embarrassing mistake.
No, don't worry. Maybe it's at 0. It's 0.77 the standard error. I don't know, but
okay, yeah, I'll check. I'll make sure.
It looks like the standard error is okay, and the stars are missing.
Yeah. Yeah, but then, but overall, I mean, even if you go across the subsample for the skills outcome in panel B, you don't observe differences, even if, I divide the sample by, possibly depending on the endogenous decisions. But what we do observe a lot more is that in terms of investment activities, this is where you start to see that children growing up in like skipped generations, the interaction that carers, in this case, grandparents, do to the children are starkly different from, family, children with parents present. So they're less likely to do any of these important activities. And if you look into the subsample, then it reflects that, if you come from even more underprivileged background, then these activities are even less. Okay, so this is more like an anecdote, suggested evidence that there might be the case to argue that there's a negative effect at the end in terms of years of schooling, and this comes from the fact that at the early life they also have fewer investments, and they're a little bit less healthy than general. But in any case, what I have not been able to present to you is, which are also very important issues, but without the data set, I cannot address, which is, the psychological health of the children, and also psychological health of the carers, and other kind of well-beings of the carer themselves, and also the migrated parents. Because now we have, I think part of the literature to say, if grandparents spend time with the grandchild, grandparents' mentality tend to be improved. But many of these studies are from the fact that, you spend limited amount of time with the grandparent, and then you leave the children back to the parents. Therefore, you have a happier well-being, but we do not have evidence of, how much mental health of the grandparent would actually be like if they have to take on the main role as parent for the second time. Okay, so with the rest of the time, I'll talk a little bit of like our approach to deal with more serious endogeneity issues, which is just something that we cannot yet control for with the fixed effect, which is endogeneity that is within family and is variance across time. Okay, so to take this, to try to tackle this, we try to employ the method of instrumental variable, the shift chair variable that have been used a lot in the context of international migration literature. So you're looking at like the past patterns of immigration to international immigration to different countries. They call it the historical share, which tend to be exogenous to the current decision of someone who about to migrate now. And then they use the shift, which is changing over time of migration patterns from the area that you're coming from. So a global shift of migration. And we think that this could be a useful instrument that also applicable to our exercise, because many of parents in our sample, one of the key reasons of skipped family is because parent moves elsewhere. Okay, so we kind of try to implement this in the context of out migration, of the internal migration within the country itself. So it's a bit of manipulation here, but I think so. Yeah, so let me quickly tell you. So we calculate this sort of shift chair with the perspective of using internal migrations from locality to different pockets of area in the countries, and we complement also with another instrument, which we also think this is exogenous to the migration decision, which is natural disaster, especially flood, the intensity of annual flood disaster at a village level. That can also be a push factor for out migration. But sadly, so I'm showing you now the first stage results, with the shift chair and with this flood incidents. So I'm showing you like what we try to do this first stage of having skip generation as our left-hand side variable with control, without control and with control. Overall, the first stage is not strong enough for us to move on to the second stage, and are confident that we do not face the issues, the key issues of weak instrument. And also, like this sort of instrument that we find tend to be strong at a later age, and almost non-existent when we try to fight migration at the younger age. I think I have a question.
Yeah, I have a question, or maybe more than a question, maybe a comment. Do you have data on the age of the migrants? Because maybe what the instrument is weak, especially the shift share, because what matters for you is migrants in, I don't know, parent age. Yeah. So maybe migrants between 20 to 35.
No, exactly. So what I use is internal migration of prime age migrants on that issues that we were trying to mimic the parent as much as possible, but no, this is what we find that we can still not find a strong correlation. So unfortunately, the first state result was not as we had hoped, and it's not what. So I tried a couple of times with different variation. So if you guys have any other suggestions of what can help us solve this bigger headache, then I appreciate it a lot. Yeah, so I think I'll draw to the conclusion here that, like, from the evidence I present to you so far, especially from the fixed effect, the sibling fixed effect identifications, we have evidence that growing up with solely grandparents during your childhood, it's not great for human capital development, especially when you experience that at the very, very young age, below 5 years old, which is related to about 0.5 year reduction in years of schooling. And we have additional evidence to suggest that this can be because of also a reduction in other kind of beneficial investment activities that carers should have done with the child, which was more absent by grandparents. And yeah, so the next step is, if possible, we're going to try to find a new way to come up with instrumental variables to take care of the final endogeneity issues. But in any case, I think it raised issues of how we can think about the inequality consequences of these just the family patterns, because so I introduced you to the concept of skip generation. So I'm going to now introduce you another term which we call the sandwich generation. So sandwich generations are like people like us that now grow up enough in the society where we also have aging issues. It's not issues because our parents going to live longer, and we're also going to have our own children, and the only breadwinner will be the one in between. And I would think that the relationship between sandwich generation, the one in the middle that try to find as much money as possible to support the other two generations, are the one that may at some point have to leave and also cause this skip generation issues back home. So there's this a lot of inequality consequences that we have to think about when we think about labor market management. How to set up the economy, and as well as the policy on childcare and education in the long run. Okay, so I end my presentation here. So my husband didn't think this is funny, but I don't know. Okay, anyway, thank you very much for your time and your comments.
Super. Thanks very much. Great timing. And an ambitious agenda here. Any comments? We have about 10 minutes for comments and our discussion.
Well, just one question. I was a bit surprised by the kids suffering from parental absence. They had more books, but they read less. Can it be right?
Yeah, so like I think the full sample analysis said they have more books, but when we go on to the subsample, those that have more books are the rich ones, and the poor ones actually have even fewer books. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, well, it was a bit surprising, because book availability is usually one proxy, right, for several education attainments, and I was a bit, shocked that maybe they had access to more books when they live without the parents, right?
Yeah, but I mean, I'm not the parent myself, but I think many of the parents can show you that if you have books, but you don't read to the child. So you don't introduce books to the child, then the child's not going to pick up books. I mean, sure. So it goes to the policy that like you can donate as many books as possible, but if you don't donate, if you don't give the actual training to the grandparents that like actually sit down with the kids and read with the kids matters, then you're not going to see the good effect.
Okay. And well, regarding instrumental variables, my personal opinion is I am very skeptical about you being able to find in this specific situation good instruments, right? On the one hand, you have a small sample, and this is a problem to start with if you want to go to instrumental variables. So, and then with all the fixed effects you have, actually the amount of variation, the remaining amount of variation is super low. So you need a super strong instrument, and I am skeptical. I would say that an alternative avenue to try to make an additional analysis is in the paper I sent you, because you can argue with theory about the possible time variant family-specific effects, and you can like bound this effect according to the effect of other covariates.
Okay.
I think you can find it useful.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, you're welcome.
Juan, can you
Hi.
hear me? Hey,
Yeah, I can see you now.
Yeah, I was wondering, so do you have information about the health of the grandparents?
Not a very good one, no.
I mean, but you know whether they are dead or alive, do you?
Yeah, but they have to be alive, right?
No. There is a piece of the sample where the kids are raised by the parents, right?
Yes.
For those, do you know whether the grandparents are alive or well?
Not sure. So because this is a household level, so if they live in the household, then I would observe the grandparents. But what I could do is I could follow some family where grandparents was there before and then not there anymore. So it could be a reason of them passing away.
Maybe the good comparison could have been between a household where the parents live and a household where the parents would have left, but the grandparents died, so they could not. Right. So whether you can use the death of the grandparents as an instrumental variable of some kind, but probably too small sample. But
I'll think about. I mean, it's a pretty. I know it's an idea that I can try to find out. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
And then so the other question that I was wondering about is, so I suppose there is a literature also on the impact of parents' death, because then usually when your parents are dead, for many cases you're raised by the grandparents. But you probably have too few of these in your sample. So that makes this question maybe.
No, it's true. I mean, that would be again like similar to what you suggested for the death as the random variation. But no, I don't have a lot of that. I'm
a very death-focused person.
Yeah, I don't have a lot of that. But I think
least, right?
Sorry,
you don't have many dead parents in your sample.
Not that the thing is, I never try to find death of parents, but I will now.
Because these, I mean, there are two main differences with respect to parents living. One is that they are not getting away to get more money, right? They're just dead, right? I mean, and then there is also the emotional impact, which makes it difficult to compare. But at least you keep income. And it's not that you keep income fixed, but it doesn't depend on some income opportunity abroad.
Yeah. In the other data set, I definitely do observe why the parents are not there. And one of the reasons are parents that, so I can definitely dig more. Thank you.
And then do you see a pattern? Because it's when you think about like causal, so the reasons that might push parents to leave, like I have two scenarios in my mind. One is a sudden drop in income, and then you make up for that by going away. Or like a great opportunity in a big city, a bit far away, right? And then, so I mean, I'm not sure exactly whether these two scenarios would lead to the same sort of endogeneity bias in your estimate.
No, I think no, you're right that I think the income shock is one of the key factors that drive or pull a family. So I mean, other instrumental variable they were trying are like opening of factories in the areas or closure of factory in the area, but again we do not find any strong correlation much. So like
among those who live, parents who live, do you observe like big variations in the income right before?
Disappoint.
I I haven't looked at it, but I'll have a look. Yeah.
Probably there are some who migrate because they had they were fired.
The income shock, yeah.
You could see probably that in your sample.
Yeah, I mean, we try to capture it from the flood incidents, or like there's a lot of natural disaster in the village.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
One last question that is lurking in the background. If not, we thank Warren for her great job, sorry, and we wish her the best to publish it up.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your suggestion and your time. Wish we meet at some point in person sometime soon. Okay.
Definitely. Here we go.
Okay.